let me begin with a very simple question, which is, why is leadership changing and why does leadership matter? And all of you all are leaders. And till I became this unemployed, starving author of a company of one, I used to basically be in a 100,000 person company, which was very global, and I would travel all over the world. And I started to notice that over the years, leadership changed and sort of evolved. And so I'd like to begin by a very simple thing, which is, what is a leader and how is a leader different than a boss? A boss is a title. A boss is a title. Now, in many of your cases, you'll run companies. It might be companies for other people. It might be their own companies that you'll have built. But basically, all of you all have somewhere in your title something that sounds very boss-like, right? President, chairman, CEO, executive vice president, chief something like that, right? Czar or whatever, big, Zarina, whatever, big names. And what has become very clear is that people genuflect in front of titles, but they don't follow titles, they follow people. And that is a very big difference. A leader is someone that people follow. A title is someone that people bend the knee to till they go to the bar and make fun of you, right? Or make fun of us, since I used to be one of those people too. So there's a very big difference. And the traits of a leader are pretty extraordinarily simple and extraordinarily difficult. And you don't have to have anybody reporting to you to be a leader, which is the other unusual thing, which is people think you have to be a leader when you've got a lot of people reporting to you. So sometime in my career at Publicis, once upon a time, I literally had 10,000 people who were reporting to me. Not 10,000 direct reports, but if you looked at everything, there were 10,000 of those 100,000, because I was overseeing all of the digital assets at some particular time. But in the last 3.5, 4 years I was there, I was on the board. On paper, it looked like I was one of the 5 most senior people in the company. I had nobody reporting to me. None. Zero. Okay? And that's because reporting relationships are known as zone of control. Leadership relationships are known as zone of influence. And in today's world, ideally you'll have both zone of influence and zone of control. But if you had to choose one, you, I think, want to select zone of influence versus zone of control. Because zone of influence is people are saying, I'll follow you and what you are trying to say, versus zone of control is, I will follow the person who has the title. See the big difference? I follow the person who has the title versus I'll follow you. And in the generations that are coming, who are younger than us, they really don't like this title stuff. And I've been doing a lot of research because I've just started working on my second book. It's not having had a baby myself, but I saw my wife have a couple. Usually when you have the first baby, you say never again. So after I finished my first book, I basically said never again. But somewhere along, I hallucinated and I have sold a second one, which is really about the future of work. And the opening chapter in that really is generational differences. And so I've been doing a lot of research on generational differences. Most of you all are probably either Generation X or baby boomers. Then the next 2 generations are basically millennials and Generation Z. There are 6 significant differences between those groups. And especially if you take Gen Z versus baby boomers, which are the extreme, they're so significant that actually explains a lot of why people are having trouble with people versus COVID or return to work or any of those things. That just happens to be like the noise. There's something else, which is the signal. So here's the difference. 1 out of every 2 people who are younger live paycheck to paycheck even if they have a full-time job. Okay, that's number one. And this I'm talking North America. These numbers are not like India or sub-Saharan Africa. This is North America and Western Europe. Number two, 25% of them believe that the future will be worse than it is today. Number three, there are 50% more likelihood to back unions. There are 100% more likelihood to be socialist. Okay? Because their basic belief is the system hasn't worked. The system hasn't worked for people who grew up through 9/11, 2008, 2009, and COVID. Most of them, if they've had the opportunity to go to college, have major debt, which they're still trying to basically pay off. So their whole thing is there's something really odd in this system. What's going on? At the very same stage, even though they're going paycheck to paycheck, even though they're worried about the future, 1 out of every 2 in the last 2 or 3 years has rejected or left a job because they did not agree with the purpose and values of the company. They're twice as likely to care about sustainability, the young folks versus the old folks or seasoned folks, right? There's a sort of difference. And most importantly, they ask a very simple question: what do you do? So the question, like, you hear this thing about quiet quitting. People are not quitting work. They're quitting bosses. Okay? And those are different things, because when someone stops working, you think that they left the company, they go get a job somewhere else. It's not like they have to pay bills to pay. They just don't sit at home. So what are they doing? They're sort of quitting sort of things. So with that being said, I try to understand what modern leadership look like, because clearly this is the next generation. And like my generation, which is the baby boomer generation, is rapidly sort of aging out of the workforce, if that makes sense. So in North America, 10,000 people turn 65 every day. 10,000 people turn 65 every day. So whether we like it or not, this next generation is the future of the business. And the reason why we're going to have to think about that is because the population, now Canada is still pro-immigrant, but the United States has decided that immigrants suck, right? And as a result, the United States is about to have flat population for the first time since its founding. It only grew by 1 million people last year, which is pretty remarkable. So it's not like we can get jobs from some other people. So what are some of those traits of leadership? So one of them, there are 2 ways of looking at it. One is what people are looking for, and there are 6 of them. And by the way, I have no PowerPoint presentation, but I'll let you know where you can get notes on all of this online, completely free at the end of this, so you can have access to all of it. So one of the things that people ask is capability, which is, that's the thing about what do you do? Why should I follow you? What have you done recently? And if what you have done recently is check in on me, tell me what to do, how is that something I'm supposed to follow? Right? What do you do? So what people are really asking is, I don't know what my boss does. Now that the person, especially post-COVID, that they're sitting at home and they don't have a chance to check in on me and tell me what to do, what exactly do they do again? Right? So how much of your time are you spending actually building stuff and making stuff happen versus telling people what to do? Right? Now, in larger companies, many people spend a lot of time telling people what to do. And their whole stuff is, look, I don't care about that. So their stuff is capability, and the more important thing they're asking is, do you have capabilities for the modern world? Or do you have capabilities for the old world? don't tell me how it used to be in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, right? We're in 2020, and it makes no sense. So if I could basically tell all my team, hey, you know, when I grew up, there were only 3 television networks and there was typewriters, and we would have to be patient. They'll say but we don't have typewriters, we don't have 3 television networks, and there's no reason to be patient. You're an idiot. Just because you did it doesn't mean that we have to do it that way, right? They won't tell it to you if they think you're a boss. They'll say, yes, 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 very good. They'll go to a bar and say, wow, Rishad's a loser, okay? Clearly he's living in some past daydream time which doesn't exist today. So capability is one. The second that they look for basically is, can they trust you? Okay, which is, can they actually trust you? Now, and they can check, unlike when we grew up, they can check whether they can trust you or not for 3 simple reasons. One is they discuss you openly. So you can't tell somebody blue and somebody else red. They're going to go to the bar and say, what did Rishad say? Blue to you, red to me. So what does he actually mean? And it doesn't mean that they have to meet at a bar. They put it up on all these little websites, right? Glassdoor, Reddit, everywhere. So I can go in, and I literally went into an organization's board, and I said, here's what's going on in your company. And I had just followed McKinsey and Bain. And they said, how come you know? They came in, they told us a whole bunch of stuff, but they didn't tell us any of this. And I said, okay, the stuff that they told you, was that correct, or what I'm telling you is correct? They said, well, you're telling us is correct. But how did you know? You didn't have the whole corporate, you don't have all the people they have. You work by yourself. I said, whoever told you that? I go online and I check. I'm a member of all these things. I go check your company. You want me to tell you what they think about you personally? I'll tell you that too. I don't know if it's true, but it exists, right? So I said, you have to get people to trust you. And the reason why trust is important is because it's part of their purpose and values. Their whole stuff is, if our boss doesn't have integrity, the company doesn't have integrity, which is pretty remarkable. The third is they're looking for time management of a very different sort. So good leaders actually have time management, but it's not the time management we think it is, which is how do we manage our calendar and get a lot of stuff done. What they're basically asking for, or what good leaders have, is how do I manage to make sure that I keep in business today and keep in business tomorrow? And usually what people do is they allocate their time based on the way they allocate their budgets. And most smart businesses, outside of those that are very R&D heavy, allocate 95% of their money onto today and 5% onto tomorrow. Does it make sense? Because that's what makes sense. But true leaders don't allocate their time the way they allocate their budget. They allocate 70% of their time to today and 30% of their time to tomorrow. So they allocate much more of their time to tomorrow relative to the spending. Because if you don't do that, then who's going to take the company into the future? So people basically say, we have to make sure that we deliver today because we won't be in business tomorrow. Yes, you have to allocate your money that way. But as a leader, you should be delegating enough so you can spend a third of your time tomorrow. And then people also look, can you inspire them? And inspiration tends to be like inspired storytelling because people choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. Nobody makes decisions based on data. And as has been mentioned, I happen to have an advanced degree in mathematics and an MBA in finance from one of the most quantitative schools. If that was true, then we would buy Samsung phones versus Apple phones. We would go to Universal theme parks versus Disney theme parks. And Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy wouldn't be the most valuable company in Europe. 7 out of 10 times you make a decision, you make it primarily on emotion. And then you use numbers to justify what you just did. Okay? It's so obvious, right? So that's what people look for. So those are the 6 traits of leaders in the modern world, which is sort of, to sort of repeat, are you capable? Can you manage time well? Can I trust you? Can you inspire me? And then another one is empathy, which is, can you think about me? But the one that is hardest for all of us to deal with, which a lot of people have written about, is vulnerability. And vulnerability is for a leader to basically say, I don't know, right? I need help, I don't know. Or I made a mistake. I would say that today, the single biggest challenge that most leaders have is we get so high on our fumes that we begin to think that our flatulence smells like Chanel 5. Okay? And we may not think we do that, but we do that because we are surrounded by people often who reflect what they think we want to hear. And then depending on our behavior, they can't actually speak up. So one of the most popular chapters of my book, which is a different way of doing vulnerability, is a simple chapter which Maurice Levy, who was my boss, found his favorite chapter, even though he particularly didn't like me doing this, and I often was banished and had to go downstairs and sit in the bar till he changed his mind and I came up again. And that is, you need an environment as a leader where people are sitting around the table, and in the middle of the table, they see something brown and moist, okay? And everybody pretends it's a brownie, but it's actually a piece of shit. Okay? So, literally, I have a chapter in my book called The Turd on the Table. Okay, how do you call out the turd on the table? If you look at leaders, if you look at companies that don't succeed, that is usually when you can begin to understand they don't succeed. When they don't succeed is when people basically say, if I call out what is truthful, I might lose my job. If I call out what is truthful, my boss might say, what's wrong with this person, right? I need to pay my mortgage, I'm going to pretend. So Wells Fargo, the bank, everybody knew that they were opening fake accounts, but nobody could speak up. If you look at the email chain, Boeing knew that they had bad software in 737 MAX for 2 years, but nobody spoke up, right? Or if they spoke up, they were actually kicked out, or people said, no, it's perfectly fine, don't worry about it. So how do you create an environment? And it's really difficult. I used to be a leader. I don't want someone to come around and say, listen, Rishad, you suck and everything you do doesn't make sense. Okay, that's not what I'm suggesting, but the ability to create an environment, and that comes from vulnerability, where you basically say, I don't know, do you know the answer? Right? And there are things in that particular book. So there are those 6 things that are very, very important for sort of leadership, which is in my book. But there are 2, 3 other things that recently have become more and more clear. And that is, why do I believe we have a leadership crisis all over the world? I believe we have a leadership crisis because, very simply, one of the biggest things that leaders need to do is accept and communicate reality. Which basically is, if something is not working well, you have to basically say it's not working well. If something is going to be bad, you got to tell people it's going to be bad. But today, you get away, not you, leadership broadly gets away, by talking total BS. Look at most political leaders. Look at the United States. I mean, that's delusions, right? I mean, the next thing they're going to say, I think they already said it, that gravity doesn't matter, right? And my whole stuff is, listen, I understand you say gravity doesn't matter and you can tweet all about it, but you jump out of a 27th floor building, you're going to be dead. Okay? Like, what the hell? Okay? And so people say, like, but a leader has to say, you know what? I'm seeing problems. All right, there's the thing. Here's what's going on. And it's very, very difficult because often, sometimes you have to say, here's what's going on. And by the way, part of the reason it's going on and having problems is because I led us to this fine, morass, okay, which I don't particularly like leading us to, but here we are. We find ourselves in this horrible place. And how do we get out of it? that is a big part that people don't want to sort of communicate, and that becomes a big thing, which is true leaders accept and face reality. But then they communicate, right? And they tell a story. And the story is, here's where we are. Here's where we're going. Here is how we're going to get there. And this is what it means for you. That's the story. Many people lose control of their companies when they forget that. They basically don't say, hey, we got ourselves a problem. Or they'll say, yes, we got ourselves a problem, but they don't say, okay, how are we going to solve it? How are we going to get there? What are you going to do? Or what is everyone else going to do? So those are some of the key things that we're seeing, with leadership in the modern world. The other thing that leaders need to do, which at least I used to not particularly like, and I might be not the only person, is provide continuous and good feedback. Okay? Because providing feedback sucks. Unless you want to provide good feedback all the time, which is fantastic, okay? But you kind of don't provide good feedback all the time, and in any particular case, it's like on feedback. But without feedback, how does one learn? And today, I'm less familiar with the Canadian marketplace, but I'm very familiar with the United States marketplace. Like never before have we become really scared of providing feedback, okay? And there are two reasons we don't like providing feedback. Until recent events, most companies had empty jobs that they were trying to fill. So the last thing they wanted to do is piss off somebody who could go get a job somewhere else. If you remember, till 6-7 months ago, or a few months ago, that was the environment. But the second one in the US, there is a great sensitivity to what if you say the wrong thing and someone goes to HR and says this person is racist, or this person is sexist, or this person is like that, right? So the whole idea basically is, how do you know that the feedback is about the person, but if the person takes it as you're criticizing not their work, but you're criticizing their identity? And so feedback has basically been dialed down significantly in the last year and a half across the United States. And I know this, and it started long before a year and a half, when there's a chapter in my book where I end, where about some feedback that I got early in my career. And I'd given my book, after I finished writing the manuscript, to about 36 different people, and they didn't know this, but half of them were in the US and half of them were outside the US. Half of them were women and half of them were men, right? And because they were from all kinds of places, I had people of every type of color and everything else. And I then talked to everyone and said, is it any good? What would you improve? I'm still writing it, so give me feedback. And they would give me feedback. And I said, I'm looking not for you to say, if it's good, good, it's a good book, but now how do you make it better? Tell me how do you make it better? So I would definitely get feedback. I wasn't like, I know you like it, but how do I make it better? One of the things that 12 of the 36 people commented, and all 12 were people of color and women. That's what I literally kept a little spreadsheet to see if there were themes. Was, hey, this story, they don't do this anymore. And this is what the story is, okay? And I'll explain to you why this is really important. So the story is, I get this amazing evaluation early in my career, which basically, if you read the evaluation, says that I walk on water, okay? And so I'm like thrilled, because of course I walk on water, and now they recognize that I walk on water, so this is absolutely amazing. So then my boss's boss calls me into their office and says, I want to talk about your appraisal. So I said, sure. So I said, okay. This gentleman is going to tell me how well I walk on water, and maybe I should report directly to him versus the person who gave me the evaluation, right? So my stuff is here. I go in there thinking that's what's going to happen, and he basically he says, close the door. So I close the door. He says, look, I've looked at this little evaluation and appraisal. He says, it's good, okay? But he says, I don't think you're going to end up being very successful here. So I said, huh? He says, on paper, you have the ingredients to eventually, at some stage, be one of the people running this place. But it's not going to happen. Okay? So I said, like, why? He says, let me ask you something. When you go out with your clients, what do you talk about? So I said, this, and this. He says, uh-huh. He says, you don't talk much when you go out with your clients outside of work. You basically talk about media and creative strategy, like, wherever you go. And then you talk about cricket. So I said, yeah. He says, where are you living? So I said, US. He says, we don't play cricket here. We play baseball. We play football. We talk about the weather. We do all kinds of stuff. And you don't do any of that. You just say, this is what I'm doing at work. He says, you're in a business of relationships. You're in a business of clients. You're in a business of understanding American culture. You're in a business where you're working in America and you're talking about tandoori chicken and cricket and going back home and just work. What's that about? So I said, I don't know. So he says, okay, we're going to fix it. You want me to fix it? So yeah, he says, if you fix it, you'll end up running this place. But if we don't fix it, it ain't going to happen. So he says, the reason you do this is because you grew up in a different place. And you even went to undergraduate school in India. And so nobody actually relates to you because you're really good at what you do, but that's about it. That's not going to be enough. So he says, here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to appraise you no longer on the quality of your work, but on the following things. Every week, I'm going to send you, because this is an advertising agency, so they can do this. I'm going to send you to either a Cubs game, a Bulls game, a White Sox game, a Blackhawks game, and I want you to write me something about what you are looking and what you are learning. Just whatever your reactions are, like this sucks, what the hell is this, is not as good as cricket, what are they doing? But I want you to do that. My kids are going to take you to homecoming games at the University of Wisconsin and University of Michigan. I'm going to get you involved in this particular club so you can get to know a little bit of American culture. We're going to do this, this, and this, and over the next 6 months, we're going to make you do as good bullshitting as anybody in America. You want to do that? I said, sign me up. I ended up being one of the people running the company. If that conversation had not happened, I don't think that would have been where it would have ended up. But that conversation it's in my book. These 12 people who came to me, they said, Rishad, I wish someone had told us this. And this is people of color and women. And they said, no one talks to us, no one takes us out anymore, because everybody is very sensitive, right? The door is kept open. Whenever they talk to us, someone from HR comes in and sits at the same time, right? Now, I'm not saying that isn't weird, horrible stuff that happens. I'm perfectly capable of seeing that. But what we've now gone to a world where we refuse to give feedback, right? But if none of us had got feedback, would we have actually ended up being as good as y'all are? Not me, I'm unemployed, but you, okay? Which is one of the key things. So that's one of the big things also in sort of leadership sort of feedback. So I will sort of now open it up for any sort of conversations and questions. But the final thing I will tell you that leadership is a dynamic thing. It's not a static thing. You'll know this only too well. Because you were a leader yesterday and today doesn't mean you're going to be a leader tomorrow. And so I've tried to figure out how one remains so. And as I mentioned, when I started my career in the world of advertising in the US, there were 3 television networks: ABC, CBS, NBC. There was PBS, which is the public television, and 1 or 2 independent channels based on the city you were in. That was basically it. And early on, I started building the case for a massive new type of media called cable television. And I literally brought in Ted Turner, who was launching who had a thing called TBS, and it was launching something called CNN, to convince my management that there was going to be a new type of media called cable television. Okay, so that's how old I am, if you think about it. Okay, fortunately, it's before I wasn't introducing the concept of radio, but at least, it was a concept of like television. Okay, that makes sense. 2-3 weeks ago, I was at McDonald's in the United States and at Kellogg's in the United States with their senior management, talking to them about the next generation of the internet. Same guy. Okay? And literally someone said, like, how are you doing this now? Like, you even stopped working and you are giving the best presentation on the future of the internet. And it's so good that Publicis sends me to do it. And I advise it to Publicis. I'm not an employee, but I go and do it, right? And I explain, here's what's going on, and don't get like fixated by crypto pricing and a whole bunch of other stuff. Here's actually what you should be focusing on. And I said, because I learned something, which is the last things I'll buy as practical advice. You cannot remain a leader unless you spend 1 hour a day learning every day. Okay? Or the equivalent of 7 hours a week. You can't do it. It's impossible. Because the world is changing so fast that we get out of date really fast. Now, I'm slow, so I take an hour and a half. Most of you all should take an hour. Okay, so that takes 1, right? That's number 1. Number 2 is from time to time, not all the time, otherwise you'll be frozen in your tracks, build a case for the exact opposite of what you think is true. So whatever recommendation I would make, and I was literally on the board, and I've proposed $10 billion worth of acquisitions to Publicis. Every time I went in there, I would give the exact opposite recommendation and my recommendation. And nobody knew which one I was recommending. Till at the end, I said, I think we need to do this, right? And the day I did not have a really strong argument against my recommendation, Maurice would not buy it. He said, you haven't thought it through. Okay? You haven't thought it through. If you can't build a strong enough case for the opposite, how the hell do you know what you know? Right? So I would go out of my way to find people, and it's very easy to find people who say I suck, so I had to go and find people who say I don't suck. But whatever, you sort of you have to go build the opposite case, if that makes sense. And the third is really to do, so that's where I'll leave you with this thing. I started learning about the future of the internet because I started playing around, right? I started doing all kinds of like amazingly interesting things. So I'll leave you with 2 things to get your learning going, okay? So one, and everything I'm going to let you know is completely free, so that's the fun part of it, okay? One of them is relatively simple. If you give me out of your 7 hours, 7 minutes out of 7 hours. So I need 7 minutes that's 1 hour a day, so it's 7 hours is what you got. I need 7 of those minutes for myself, okay? Then you can use obviously you can sample it. If you don't like it, you don't have to have 7 minutes. So go to this address, which is Rishad, RISHAD, .substack, SUBSTACK.com. So that's one address, rishad.substack.com, okay? The other address is, if you Google me or whatever, you can go to my website, which is rishadtobaccowala.com. The spelling of Rishad Tobaccowala is in the program, and they got it spelled right. So rishadtobaccowala.com, and just add at the very end, /, just the sign /100. It'll take you to a different place, okay? So you'll still be on my website, but you'll you'll be able to guide. It's very strange. I've just said something. It's like an Easter egg. Okay, so let me tell you what those two things are. So I wanted to learn, as an author, I wanted to learn what is the future of writing. And I started this about 2 years ago. And a lot of writers were leaving where they were writing, and they were going into starting their own businesses. And I said, what the hell is a Substack? So what a Substack is, it's a company, it's a technology company, that basically is a content management platform, so you can type in some stuff. It's an email delivery platform, so it sends out emails. And it's a billing platform, so you can actually charge people. And the way you pay for Substack is you pay them 10% of all your revenues. What I basically said was, I want to learn Substack, but I don't want, no one's going to pay to read me. So I was not going to do the billing part of it, and so I don't pay Substack anything, because 10% of 0 is 0, right? So I just write, and people put their email in and they get it, okay? My stuff is it's completely 100% opt-in, so I don't send it to anybody. I've just told you what the address is. If you put your email in, you'll get it, okay? It's free of everything, so there's no data harvesting, no advertising, no subscription, no upselling, nothing, okay? It's just everything I possibly know on a different topic every week. I've now done this for 118 Sundays in a row. And it's 100% opt-in, and I have 30,000 readers, including over 500 CEOs, which is kind of interesting, right? My most recent piece, the incoming CEO of Starbucks wrote to me. The most recent one was basically called Messiah Karma, which is when leaders get too high on themselves, and I use people like Elon Musk and Putin and Kanye West, and, people like that, right? But what's particularly, and if you don't like it, you just say opt out and you're opted out, so you don't have to worry about it. But the good news is it's like Chicago weather. If you don't like one particular week, just wait, see what happens. Just see what happens the next week, okay? So the one before this was on poetry. I wrote on poetry and why poetry is important. Okay, so it's not just work. It's very much what the PEO stands for. It's a whole bunch of things. It's not just work. So I'll leave you with that, and you can get that, and it's completely free. This particular talk that I gave you is at that other site, which is rishadtobaccowala.com/100. So what I've done is I've taken the 120 pieces of writing, 118 pieces of writing, and I've organized them into 12 categories. Because a lot of people said, Substack doesn't have a very good search engine. So when you go to my Substack, you'll see all 118 pieces. But you might say, I don't know what to read. So what I did was I organized it into like 12 different categories. So one of those categories is called On Leadership. So everything I've talked about, including things like debossification, how to give feedback, is on leadership. Each piece is 6 minutes long, 7 minutes long. It's between 5 and 7 minutes long, right? Each article also introduces a new artist. So if you don't like the words, look at the pictures, okay? A new photographer, a new painter, a new whatever, okay? Because my whole stuff is life is not just about business. Mm-hmm. So we sort of show that. So that you'll find there, and you'll have everything from tomorrow when I speak about the future, my future thing is there. So the first thing is called the future. I have a thing called leadership. I have future of marketing. I have how to learn. And right at the bottom, I've got two, which I think you'll particularly like. One is called how to improve yourself. And then the last one is called wisdom. And in wisdom, you might want to read Architecting Joy. Because as you all are very successful, someone may ask you, why do you still work? Okay? And what is success? So I basically say, here's a definition of success, right? And this is what I've discovered success is. And I'll give you a cheat sheet on what my definition of success is. And it'll work for all of you all. It doesn't matter what you all do. Success is when you have the freedom to spend time in the way that gives you joy. Open up for questions. Let's go ahead.
I've been a reader since edition 53.
Yes.
My question, though, is about your creative process. Because you said it to the group, you have wild swings when you're writing. I'm with you at about 80 to 90% of your writing. Some weeks it's like, well, I don't know why you wrote that, but
Right.
that's fine. You'd expect that. But what's your creative process? Like, do you focus your week's coming work on your experience of the week, or do you have multiple projects kind of on the go that you slowly bring into land and kind of slot them into your week? You must put a lot of energy and time.
Yes, so I basically spend for what takes you 7 minutes to read takes me 4 hours to write. Okay, so I allocate 4 hours a week, and it's free. Okay, so there are three things I do. The first is sometimes, so I actually figure out what I'm writing on a Saturday. I write it on Saturday, so Saturday
Before you release?
Yes. Okay, so I figure out what I'm writing is on Saturday. Once in a while, I might have a clue. Like I have no clue what I'm going to write this Saturday. Okay. Now, once in a while, I'm on a Saturday. I don't know what I'm going to write. I have to publish. And I said, oh shit, now what happens? Okay. Then at that particular stage, I go to the cutting room floor of my book and find stuff that didn't make it into my book because we just edited it. I wrote more than was in the book. And I said, okay, this I can use, okay? And then I reconfigure that, if that makes sense. Or it might basically, and then I make sure that in the course of any 6 weeks, so there are people who respond to certain types of writing and other people who respond to the exact opposite of what you might, you might say, okay, 80% of this I like, the other 20% I know he's insane, what's he writing this about, right? Or like, what's this? That 20% to somebody else is like, this is exactly why I'm writing for this guy, right? Now, I'm not writing for an audience because I'm not charging anything. I don't run any advertising against it, so I don't need like a crowd of people, if that makes sense. But it would be on something. So like most recently, this thing about Messiah was actually, this I knew about 2-3 days before because I began to realize what was going on with Elon Musk and with Kanye West and Putin and things like that. So I said, okay, we've got to like figure out, there's something going on. How do I, figure that one out? But again, in there, my thing was, how do these people eventually lose? And so my whole stuff is how do they get to their stage and how do they lose? And so then I started, using Napoleon because Napoleon opened the Russian front. And then I realized that the best of us, all of us, we don't get beaten. Most of us beat ourselves. Okay, so the leaders I've admired have never been beaten. They at some stage beat themselves, right? By doing something stupid, overstretch. It's usually like there's a line. They go over the line. If that makes sense? But that's what I do, and I'm sort of figuring out like the process. And I find it kind of fascinating because it's like high tension on Saturday morning. Please go ahead.
On the subject of understanding cultural subtlety, did you learn the difference between White Sox fans and Cubs fans?
Yes, absolutely.
That's very good.
I have, and because of where I lived, which is in Hyde Park, where Obama lived in the University of Chicago. Till recently, I moved downtown. I was a White Sox person because it was South Side. And also, I tend to be an underdog person, and White Sox is for the poor people, and Cubs is for the rich people. Please go ahead.
The question for you is a fellow. I've been in the ad agency industry for 30 years, so I'm curious how you would. I'm going to ask a question that's fully self-involved, but it relates to what you're saying. So you talked about feedback and the traits that we need to have to manage Gen Zs. So let's just say, asking on behalf of a friend, if have recently had an issue with a Gen Z where they posted some TikTok videos in the spirit of fun, but mocking the culture of the agency. So one video said, I have to put up a funny meme so my agency thinks I'm with them on culture. And a video of him rolling his eyes. And a video of our Slack conversations in the back. The second one says, when you're wholly unprepared for a meeting, you ask a stupid question and your boss says, great question, hashtag ad agency, hashtag. what kind of feedback, knowing what we're dealing with Gen Z, and understanding that the platform exists for entertainment, but there's an intersection with work and culture.
Right.
For a friend, any guidance?
Yes. Okay, so the first is get physical at something else.
Get
Physical at something else. Okay, this is what I mean. I would, every morning when I would wake up in Chicago, because we were 7 hours behind Paris, I would do my 1 hour of learning, and then I would open my email, and I would get enraged. Okay? At which stage I wanted to fire off all kinds of like crazy shit to all kinds of people, including my boss. But I then went down and ran, right? And in my running, I hated upon them all. Okay? If that makes sense. So a lot of these things are stupid. They're bad for the agency. They're idiotic for them to do. So initially, you got to take that angst because you get angry. You're like a human being, like I get like really angry. And I try to take it out on something else. I'm not saying slap somebody in your family, but something that's a little bit more benign. I tell my daughters to go boxing, things like that. But that's sort of that's the first thing. The second is pause for a little while, just a little while. And then I'll give you what I have done under those circumstances, because I've had a lot of that, because I built a lot of early digital agencies, so there was a 2-generation difference between me and the people who had the talent, okay? If that makes sense, who knew what the hell was going on. And this was my way, but everybody has their own way. I would basically say to them, can I take you for a drink? Okay? I would take them away and I'd say, hey, listen, I want to tell you why what you've done or are doing is personally hurting me. Okay? You might not have meant to, but I personally am hurt by this. And I'm hurt, and you didn't probably mean. So I don't say, why did you hurt me? Right? It's like, I'm sure you didn't mean to, but let me just tell you why I think it's hurting me. Or in many cases, why it's hurting all of us, and you're part of all of us. Right? But I said, maybe I'm wrong. So maybe, first of all, I don't think you wanted to hurt us. But second is maybe I misunderstood because I don't understand TikTok, or I don't understand what it is. That usually solves the problem. Okay? If someone does that repeatedly, then unfortunately you have to go to the other part, which isn't necessarily correct, which is say, maybe you don't want to work here. Okay? But the initial thing is, our first reaction is, just because it's so stupid and it's hurting the company and hurting us, is to go the other way. So this is, my whole stance is, between usually how we respond determines what actually hit us versus what hit us, right? So how the US reacted to 9/11 determined the impact of 9/11 as much as 9/11 impacted 9/11. So that's what and it's very, very hard, let me tell you, because I know exactly what you're going through, because now, fortunately, I don't have any of that in my, only I can say bad stuff against myself, which is fine, because I'm a company of one. But it was probably, but I would simply say, what do you mean, right? But not like in a hostile way, but you've hurt me. And that's where vulnerability is a huge, huge asset. I'm not saying fake vulnerability, real vulnerability, which is like, this is hurting the company, this is hurting me, but maybe I don't understand. I'm sure you didn't mean this, but what did you mean? Things like that. Any other, yes, please.
Dealing in some research and dealing with, PhD type people, and some of them seem to be more focused on what sort of fame and dollars they get than the cause. So I'm just curious how, maybe I haven't expressed or
Sure. No. So
well enough.
yeah. So I wrote a piece, and one of the pieces you'll find in this or that in that /100 is a piece called The Great Attraction. So when everybody basically, this is how I think counter, right? So everybody was writing about the Great Resignation. So I said, okay, but most people are staying in the company. Like, what keeps them there? I understand why people are leaving, but what keeps people? And I basically came up with the following factors. And it's a tic-tac-toe, it's very simple. People join a company or PhD program or you're a professor for three key things: money, fame, and power. Okay? So all of y'all, even if y'all claim that none of those matter, it matters. Okay? Money, fame, and power. If you're younger, it's money, recognition, and autonomy. But that's why somebody joins a company or a school or whatever they do. But often people will come even to the PhD professors and everything else, and there'll be a university that's better known, or someone will give them a larger department or give them a raise. But not everyone leaves. Some people leave, but majority don't leave. So why do people stay? So people stay for purpose, values, and connection. So they believe in the purpose of the institution, they value what they're doing, and they feel connected either to, in this case, their students, other professors, maybe their provost or whatever, but they feel connected. For younger people, purpose, values, and connection has tended to be, for most people, money, fame, and power was the dominant factor, and purpose, values, and connections was the secondary factor. It's still a secondary factor because people need to get paid, etc., but it's become a stronger secondary factor with certain groups of people, including younger people. But this is the one that has become very clear post-COVID. So the first two I've written in my book, the first two lines, this one I did research post-COVID. It was always there, but it required COVID for us to see. And as you manage your teams at companies, just think about this. Again, this is like broad strokes. Every company is different. So if people join for money, fame, and power, and people stay for purpose, values, and connections, I asked, why do people thrive? You join, you stay, but why do you thrive? You thrive for freedom, story, and growth. Okay? So you thrive because you feel free to both not only express yourself, but you have some freedom in how you do things. Part of now that is flexible work or whatever it is, right? Freedom. Story is the very big difference, at least from my generation, which is I'm older than most of you, I'm 63, so I'm a baby boomer, right? Versus my kids, who are actually millennials, they're not Gen Z, they're in their 30s. And the difference basically is, I always said, how did I fit in the story of Leo Burnett, the ad agency? People ask, how does Leo Burnett fit in the story of my life? So a lot of people are basically saying, how does this company fit in the story of my life? Because the likelihood that this company will be around in the 45-year career that I have is not that cool. Most companies, they don't die out, but most companies only last in the S&P 500 for 15 years. Most careers are 45 years. So the whole idea is how, being a company player basically means company comes number one. No, the company, how does it fit into my life? Now, in your case, you all might be senior, it might be your company, you'll have started it, so that is your story. But for a lot of people, that's not their story. It fits in their story. But the single most important thing that I've discovered is growth, which is how do they grow their skill sets, how do they grow themselves and people, and how do they remain marketable in a world of continuously changing technologies and changing, needs, etc. So those are the things that, is why. So what you'll do is different people will have different things in the model, and obviously there'll be some people who say, I don't care about purpose, values, connection, freedom, story, and growth, just give me money, fame, and power, and get out of hell. Different strokes for different folks, but usually it's some combination of those. Go ahead.
My question's about disruption and innovation. So you mentioned that you launched a number of digital agencies. before doing that, did you attempt to create digital services in traditional agencies? And was that possible, or did you have to go outside?
So I attempted it, and then I had to do something that was half outside, half inside. Okay, so in 1994, 5, 6, around that time, I began to understand that there was this thing coming that had started coming called the internet. Okay, a little before that, before even the internet, there was these things we don't remember called America Online, right, and CompuServe and stuff like that. And I launched the Leo Burnett Interactive Marketing Group. And I launched it, grew it from 0 to 5 people, and then went to my management and said, this ain't gonna work. And they said, why isn't it gonna work? I said, there are 3 reasons it's not gonna work, and here are they, right? And I said, I don't know how to solve it, but maybe you all do since you all are senior people. So number 1 is I now need to know people who write code. And there's nobody in this Leo Burnett company who writes code. We make film. We write print ads, right? This is writing code. And in those days, it was like macro media was all new and all of Flash and things like that. So I need people like that. We don't have people like that. That's number 1. Number 2, in traditional advertising, and this is again in those days, you could, the amount of money that you spent in called non-working media relative to working media tended to be about 1 to 7. So if you ran $100 million of advertising, the total amount of production costs and fees and everything else might be $10 or $12 million, right? Agency fees, producing, developing stuff, all of that. It used to be about that. But in this particular world, that number was 30 to 40%. And I couldn't sell it through the same door because people were used to a particular way of dealing with it. And the third one, which was very, very important, is client credibility. Because by which time I was competing with companies called Organic.com, Agency.com, Modem Media. And they said, what's this Leo Burnett thing? These are all these shiny new toys. So my leadership basically said, okay, I get it, but you're telling us this is the future. We're not going to basically fund a future that doesn't belong to us. That makes sense, right? But I said, okay, but we can't fund the future that we currently do. So I was the first person in the history of Leo Burnett who convinced them to take the name off the door. Okay, so Leo Burnett never had taken their name off the door. And I said, we have to take the name off the door. I had to go to the board to convince them. And we bought a 2-person company called Giant Step, 2-person. I remained a Leo Burnett employee. I went over to Giant Step, which the first 6 months were in the building, then we went to Greektown. And everybody else was a Giant Step employee with completely different compensation that was built for that world. But it was 75% owned by Leo Burnett and 25% owned by the people at Giant Step, not me. So management was, you are a Leo Burnett person, you get, this is what you are. But we are funding this, we control 75% of it, and off we go. That was the beginning of, that turned out to be very, very successful because I found out a middle model. And since then, and then I launched a thing in the media world called Starcom IP, but there I made it easy to migrate back. And then after that, we did a whole bunch of other new things. So it's managing the cultures, and the key, the really hard part is how do you make an existing company fund something that is the future with them still not meddling it so much that they'll kill it, but it can't be so far apart that they won't fund it and everybody will hate you, right? So those are sort of different models, if that makes sense. And I guess we're out of time, but thank you again for attending.